Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I am thrilled to welcome Karen Abbott, New York Times bestselling author, with her new nonfiction piece. It's called Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy: 4 Women Undercover in the Civil War. Well, Karen, welcome back to Naperville and Anderson's.
I'm happy to be back.
And we're in a different setting this time
Yes.
than you were the last
Historic
time.
Civil War era.
This is the Century Chapel. This chapel was built in 1864, so I thought it was a great setting.
It's perfect. It's beautiful.
For this event tonight.
Yeah.
So this book, Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy, it's just brilliant. These 4 women that you wrote about, and the book's been out almost 3 weeks.
No, just 2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. So from all your fans, you know, from Sin in the Second City and American Rose and all those who follow you, what are you hearing so far? Because we're hearing a lot of really good things on this side.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people just interested. They had no idea that women played such a major role in the war. I guess every time people thought of women in the Civil War, they thought of women darning socks and sewing uniforms and maybe raising money for supplies, but nobody knew these women who, you know, lied, cheated, stole, flirted, wheedled, avenged, drank, murdered their way through the war. So.
Right. So you know, I think this book is kind of talking about women in their times, and those women that really challenged, you know, the mores and what was going on at the time, to really fight for their cause. Because you have 2 women for the North and 2 women in the South. So of these 4 women, for you, who is the one that stuck out for you can most connect with personally?
As for connecting personally with, I would say Elizabeth Van Leeuw. She was, you know, this sort of staunch abolitionist, and she sort of was sleuthing and working undercover. And I thought she was an ideal spy because she was so stealthy. And here's somebody who was living in the Confederate capital of Richmond and who had the guts to put one of her family's former slaves in the Confederate White House as a spy. And I just thought that was remarkable. And I also had the good fortune of connecting with one of her descendants.
Oh, cool.
He shared a lot of information about her that had never been talked about before.
Yeah. So, you know, for the seed, because I always find it fascinating how you find that little germ that starts a story growing for you, and wanting to find out about everything you can about these subjects. So where did this one start to grow for you?
Well, you know, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, so I was a northern girl, and I moved down to Atlanta in 2001 and was shocked by how the Civil War seeped into everyday life down there in a way that it never does up north, and I assume not in the Midwest either.
No.
But, you know, you get used to the occasional Confederate flag on the lawn and the jokes about the War of Northern Aggression, and the point was really driven home for me one day when I was stuck in traffic for hours behind a pickup truck that had a bumper sticker that said, "Don't blame me, I voted for Jefferson Davis," who was the president of the Confederacy, of course. So I just sat there and said, oh my God, you know, there's got to be something here. And of course, my mind goes to what were the women doing?
Right. Well, it's funny because I lived in Mississippi and Louisiana, Texas for a while, and it's so true about that.
Yeah.
And
it's still going on.
It's still going on. Well, it wasn't too long where they took the Confederate flag off the top of the South Carolina Capitol building, I believe, in Charleston. So. Of these 4 women, and knowing the 4 of them, Belle Boyd, Emma Edmonds, and Rose O'Neill Greenhow, and Elizabeth Van Leeuw, these 4 women they're so very different. But I think, you know, there has been histories written about them, but I think we really didn't know them. And why is it we don't know about the women behind what happened during the Civil War on both sides of the war?
I think because most Civil War buffs read books by men and about men, and the men are writing them. So it's just sort of the volume of Civil War books out there. You know, the women, if there are any women's stories, and there have been some academic biographies, they just get buried. And so it's been, you know, a pleasure and an honor to try to resurrect these women and give them their place. So.
And Emma Edmonds, I know there's been a great picture book recently that did come out for younger kids, but it doesn't.
I didn't know that.
It's a very good picture book. It came out just a couple of years ago. And it's really
shopping for my nieces and nephews then,
Well, yeah, but I'm sure you can probably illuminate a lot of what's in the book, a lot more than what's in a picture book. So each of these women, tell us a little bit about each of them. And Belle Boyd, I mean, what?
Oh, she was so funny.
Whoa, what an incredible woman. I mean, a woman who wanted a lot of attention.
Yeah.
I mean, her life, she was begging for attention.
Exactly.
Even hitting the stage after the war. I mean, everything she did, it just blew me away. So tell us a little bit about her.
She was constant comic relief for me. Every time she was on the page, I just started laughing. She was 17 years old, of course, when the war broke out, and she was all id. and very overt with both her opinions and her sexuality in a way that was very unusual for the time. I sort of think of her as if Sarah Palin and Miley Cyrus had a 19th century baby. It would have been Belle Boyd. You know, she's just out there. She kicks things off in July of 1861 when Union forces invade her hometown of Martinsburg, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, and threaten to raise a flag over her home, a Union flag. And she will not stand for this, and shoots this Union soldier dead, and gets away with it. And that course, she's off running after that.
Right. And she was discovered, but then she was captured and was in a prison for a while.
Yes, and had quite a few adventures in prison, of course, and managed to get all the attention she wanted in prison too.
Right, but it's so amazing. I mean, she had this charisma and this charm about her, but you say about it, she wasn't a beautiful woman to look at, because I love the photographs. I mean, the photographs and the maps in this book really added to what you're reading about. But she was this woman who just had that it, you know, that stuff.
I think so, and she was a notorious seductress, as you said. She was, everybody was falling all over themselves for her. One of my favorite stories is Union General James Shields. She seduced him. One Northern journalist said that she was closeted for 4 hours with him, and subsequently wrapped a rebel flag around his head, sort of celebrating this conquest. And her obsession with Stonewall Jackson too was really funny to me. Just her desire to just get into Stonewall's good graces and capture his attention.
So she was a bit obsessed with him.
Oh, she was completely obsessed with him. Telling everybody she wanted to occupy his tent and share his dangers, which if I were Stonewall Jackson would be more frightening than anything the Union Army might have done. So.
Okay, so we have her, but now we go to Emma Edmonds, and you know, it's interesting. There's a book out, and I think you've done an event or going to do an event with Laird Hunt, who's written the book Never Home. And it's a fictional story, but about a woman named Constance Thompson who disguises herself as a man and fights in an Ohio regiment. And I thought it was a beautiful novel. And these books, I've been talking about them together constantly, which is so cool.
No, it's an honor. It's a good book.
It's a great book. And you got to understand you really make it clear what it must felt like to be a woman, to witness, disguised as a man, witness the horrors of battle and what happened during the Civil War. So what really surprised you about her and what she did fighting for the Union?
Well, she was somebody who had this vulnerability about her that I thought was quite remarkable in the context of what she had done, which was disguising herself as a man 2 years before the Civil War. And she had that confidence to carry off her disguise as a man, and fought in the bloodiest battles of the war, and was a courier and spy for the Union Army, and had some quite really death-defying adventures underlying spying for the Union Army. And just the constant fear she lived under that she might get caught, she might be exposed. Not only the threat of death under battle or going undercover, but just the idea that she might be revealed, and all of this that she worked so hard for would be taken away from her. And I love her love story too. And of course, she has a love story.
Well, she, you know, how can she help it not being surrounded by these men all the time? But the love, it's just incredible. So number 3, Rose O'Neill Greenhoe. And just thinking about her, she's a Washington D.C. socialite. You know, so she has access to some of the top-ranking officers in the Union Army, plus the politicians that are in the Northern's capital. So tell us a little bit about her.
Well, she was a tough one. I mean, Rose is a vile racist. I mean, there's no two ways about it. This is somebody who believes in the institution of slavery. So I tried to look at her life and put her into context and figure her out. And you know, 5 children had died within 4 years. She had lost her husband in a freak accident. She lost her financial stability. And as you said, she lost her access to the White House. She lost 20 years of Democratic rule. And, you know, here's somebody who had been confidants with President James Buchanan. And all of that was gone when Lincoln was elected. So you could just understand why she would have done anything to sort of grasp her old life, to reclaim a bit of what she had. So when the Confederates asked her to run a spy ring in the middle of Washington, D.C., she just jumped at the chance.
And I mean, the loss and the bitterness that she had.
Very bitter.
It really drove her to do what she did.
Absolutely. And her father was murdered by a family slave. There was that too.
It's just incredible the loss she had. So, So then we have our 4th incredible woman here, Elizabeth Van Lew. An abolitionist. And I loved it. It was like she was like the James Bond of for the North during this. Really, I mean, these secret rooms, and you know, all different like dishes that had hiding places, and all these cool things she had to create this espionage ring that was just incredible. Tell us about her.
Well, she was, as I mentioned, she was an abolitionist who then bringing this back to Richmond. She went north to be educated and came back to Richmond, and then fought against the institution of slavery. And this was a very dangerous position for her to have after the war broke out.
Right.
Before the war, people just thought she was this sort of crazy old eccentric spinster living with her mother in this mansion on the hill. But after that, it was very dangerous for her to espouse these views. And she suffered death threats. Confederate detectives followed her everywhere. And nevertheless, she pursued this incredible Union spy ring that eventually spanned all of Richmond and counties surrounding, and even in other states, and was sort of the savior for the Union Army.
Yeah, right. So we have two women,
Yeah.
either side here. But what I loved about it, the way you weaved their stories together into this great narrative. So you're sort of seeing the course of the war through the major events that are happening, but through the lives of these four women and what they were doing. Was that really hard to do, thinking of the timeline you had to keep and keeping the facts of what they did? But you weaved it so well together, you get such a completely different view of what was going on in the war.
Well, thank you. I picked these four women specifically because their stories touched. It was really important for me that there was a cause and effect, that one woman's behavior would affect another circumstances. For example, Rose Greenhow is spying on the Union Army. Emma Edmonds she's actually watching Emma Edmonds as she marches, and her spying affects Emma Edmonds in the Union Army. So I really like that cause and effect. There was a point where I had to print out all the pages and spread them over my 600 square foot apartment in New York City, and had nowhere to walk because I had to figure out where the connections were. But it was fun. It was a puzzle to me.
Yeah, I mean, but you put it together so well. Because, and I've always been amazed at the way all three of your books, how easily they read. You know, when you think of history and you're reading about something, but this narrative, they're so readable and they're fun.
Oh, thank you.
But you're gaining so much insight into a particular time period and the women that occupied these time periods. So was it a daunting task when you think of all the books over the years that have been written about the war between the North and the South, and you think about the volumes? Was it daunting to sit down and think of that? And this is a hefty volume. And, but it was. What did you feel like before you sat down and wrote this?
Well, I had to keep reminding myself this wasn't a Civil War book. This is a book specifically about these four women and their stories. And I had to keep telling myself, you're not writing the history of the Battle of Gettysburg. You don't need 10 pages on the Battle of Gettysburg. You don't need to talk about Pickett's charge.
Pickett's charge one more time.
Yeah,
right? Exactly.
So it's kind of like what were keep the focus where it belongs on the women.
Yeah. So. Right. So, you talked about sometimes, I always wonder about, the history is always written by the victors, and it's always men usually, right? So you think about history and the way it affects women, and especially wartime. But I think wartime makes women, those who will do what they have to do to help the cause, but those who will take that bolder step and really get involved and sort of change things for women going forward. And you think back on, even during the Revolutionary War, there were some women who disguised themselves. And then in moving on into World War I and World War II and what women did and their roles and how it's changed history. So what do you see for women? Because there were a lot of other women who disguised themselves as men, other women who did things during the Civil War. But what did you think that did for women and feminism in a way after the war was over?
That's an interesting question. There were a couple things I took away from this in terms of women's roles. One was how women could exploit their gender and the ideas about their being the weaker sex to advance their cause. Using their gender as both a psychological and physical disguise, physically hiding dispatches in their hoop skirts and up in their hair, and psychologically the idea that men did not think women were capable of this treasonous activity. Not only capable, but could of executing it more deftly than men. And there was that great quote from one of Lincoln's officials who said, "What are we going to do with these fashionable women spies?" And it was a conundrum. It was they didn't understand that women were not only victims of war, they were perpetrators of war. And I think it was the first time in American history when, as you said, there were women who disguised themselves and who spied for the Revolutionary War, but they weren't vocal about it. This is the first time Rose Greenhow is standing up and saying, I am a Southerner, I am a rebel, and I'm proud of that. And go ahead and Union government fry me. I mean, she was pretty much challenging them to execute her. And I think that's the first time American women really sort of made that bold stand publicly in terms of their politics and their views. And some of them, a couple of them wrote their own stories, and one even tried to write her own story before the war ended. I think it was Emma Edmonds, who wrote something. So it's interesting. So they are very proud of what they did, and they wanted people to know about it. So it's a little difference. And of course, Belle Boyd wanted to make money off it.
Oh, no kidding, no kidding. Hit the stage and make some money with all that. So how much research do you do? And I know you, just looking at the footnotes and the information in the back of the book, that's a big chunk of the book. So how much do you do? Where do you do it? And when do you know when to stop? Where it's just so interesting. I can just find out a little bit more. And it's hard to stop and say, I got to sit down and write this now.
Well, if it were up to me, I'd still be researching. Like, but they had to start prying it from my cold dead hands. Right. But you know, I researched this book for about 5 years. I've been thinking about it for longer than that, but researching it actively about 5 years, and went everywhere. I went to North Carolina. There was Rose Greenhow Archives there, Washington, D.C., where I found the black scrap of silk where Rose rolls up her dispatches in the hair.
Yeah, then there's some great pictures of some of that stuff in the book.
Yeah, I'll have them tonight too.
Yeah. Oh, cool. All right.
In New York Public Library, which of course is right near home, but it was where Elizabeth's papers are and some of her death threats. So to actually see her death threats and hold them in my hand and realize she held these in her hands like in 1864 and how terrifying that must have been.
Okay.
But it's important for me to try to get as many details as I can and to get the facts right and lay it out as it happened as best I can. It's sort of like being a prosecutor and you're not there, but you gather enough facts to try to paint the scene and paint the scenario and bring the characters to life. So.
Well, it's also too they're real women, so you don't shy away from their faults and the things you don't like about them.
Exactly.
You know, which is, and I think that presents it very well in the book that you see all sides of them. You know?
Well, you have to. I didn't. And some people have called me on that and said, "Don't you think you should have given less attention to the Confederates or taken some moral stance on them?" And I just think it's not. That's not my job. My job is to present their history as it was, warts and all, and I think my judgments about them are pretty clear in what I included about them. So.
Yeah. But you know what? I think this book, and I read one little quote. It was from Denise Kiernan. She wrote something about it, and she said she's calling it battles to boudoirs, you know, which I love that. So, but in a way, and in so many different ways, you can call this an intimate history.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the simple way in which women became intimate with men in order to get information and find things, but it's an intimate way into women's lives and the way they reacted to war and what they needed to do. So I think she really said that from battles to boudoirs is a great way to put it.
I think that was pretty interesting too, and just how it's sort of carrying that into the idea of how women's roles also changed after the war. I mean, their roles were permanently changed after this. So 60,000 women were left widows. Thousands of men came back amputees.
Right.
They had to take charge of their households. They had to redefine their whole, idea of the Southern Belle. The genteel Southern Belle was gone after the Civil War.
Right.
So it was just sort of this, and of course, many of them went on to become suffragists and sort of take charge in the more public sphere. So it was sort of the whole thing had changed women's roles.
Yeah. So what of all the research you did, and was there anything you left out that you would have loved to put in because it didn't quite fit into the narrative of these four women?
Yeah, there were a couple spies on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, were they? Okay.
One was Pauline Cushman, who was a Union spy. She was an actress, and she was operating in Louisville, Kentucky. And she got captured by the Confederates and sentenced to be hanged, and was rescued at the last minute in dramatic fashion. And I wanted to fit her, like shoehorn her in somehow, but her action only took place over a couple months, so it didn't really fit in. But honorable mention. Okay. But when you think about it, of all the women who did spy for each their side in whatever capacity they did, and the two women in this book, they were imprisoned for a while, they were captured for a while, but then they were let go. They were released. Were there stories of women who, because they didn't know what to do with women, like you mentioned before, when they committed this sort of thing? So were there any that really were, they were hanged or anything like that? I mean, was there anything? I think the only hanging that came, men were hanged, obviously. But I think the only hanging of a woman that resulted during the Civil War was Mary Surratt at Lincoln. I think before that, the Union government was far too skittish to hang a Confederate woman like Rose Greenhow, who was not only a widow, but the mother of a young girl. And God forbid they hang her and make her a Confederate martyr. And they were always conscious of what England and France were thinking too. If they started hanging Southern women, England and France already thought the North was a bit barbaric. It was going to be even more so. So they were very careful about that. And I think once Lincoln was murdered, though, that was all bets were off.
Right. I've read another quote that they call you the pioneer of sizzle history. I don't know. Do you like that moniker or not? Because when I think about it, I think you've chosen. I don't think you've chosen to be that, but you've just chosen women who happen to have this. This was just sort of part of who they were.
Yeah.
But it's not, what do you think of that moniker? Do you like that?
It's interesting. You're like the third person to ask me this, and I've never thought about it. No, I've never thought about it until like this week.
But I never thought about it that way either, though.
And like when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's a nice quote to put on a book.
Well, yeah.
And then I started thinking, well, a man probably wouldn't be called that, but also are there worse things to be called? And if sizzle means bringing history, making it interesting for people, and there might be a little salacious quality to some of it. I mean,
so be it.
So I sort of just started embracing it and thinking it was fine.
Yeah. So when your first two books, when you did the Everly Sisters, and what they had, the Everly House in the old Levy District, which is now the South Loop in Chicago, and then your book about Gypsy Rose Lee. What do you take away from studying these 7 women when you think about it, now that you've really delved into their lives and given us such an incredible view of them and their place in history? Of all 7, what are the characteristics you bring out about all of them?
Well, I picked all of them. I realized that I write about women whose lives I wish I lived. I'm jealous of all of them. I would have traded places with any of them just to live, 1/3 of the excitement and danger and thrills that they had. But I just really admire the way they pushed boundaries and pushed against mores of their time, and were revolutionaries in their own way.
Right.
Despite many heartbreaks and setbacks that they all had. They all had pretty difficult lives.
Yeah. Well, and the Everly Sisters too were like chameleons. They could change and do
these great liars. I like liars.
Great liars. There you go. Yeah, I think you do. Yeah. And these there were a lot of liars in this book. Yeah, and what they did. Yeah. So you majored in English, and then after college you went into journalism for a number of years. From that experience, what do you bring from your journalism to your writing of these books and the research? I mean, what's the plus you got from those experiences?
I think number one, I know to honor a deadline. I was used to, and I'm not afraid to be edited. When you're a journalist, your words aren't precious. They cut them, and they don't. You can't care about them. Also, the detail gathering. You can't try to be funny or poignant or sort of sweet or sentimental or smart. You have to let the details do those things for you. And I think in journalism, you learn how to construct a very tight piece. You learn how to use one sentence or one detail to really make something pop a little bit, because you don't have a lot of space.
Right. Sure.
So I think that if anything, journalism has done that, and also learning how to write and research at the same time.
Right. Sure. Now I know you've mentioned your grandma before, and she's been sort of the inspiration for several things in your life, and especially for how you got into writing, even Sit in the Second City. But tell us a little about your grandmother and how she's inspired you in several different ways here.
Well, my grandmother just turned 96.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
wonderful.
And she still tells stories. She's full of stories, and the story about her ancestor going missing in 1905 was what led me to the Everly Sisters, and her story about her cousin saw Gypsy Rose Lee perform in 1935 brought me to Gypsy Rose Lee.
Cool.
She didn't really have much to do with the Civil War, but I've sort of always honored and appreciated her love of storytelling and her her gift for sharing secrets. She's somebody who's not afraid to, if you pry just enough, the secrets come tumbling out, and I sort of love that about her.
Oh, that's so cool. So you blog for the Smithsonian, right? And you also write for the New York Times, the Disunion.
Yeah.
That's really cool. But what kind of things do you write, especially for Disunion, thinking about the Civil War and the book that's just been out? So.
Well, I wrote about Belle Boyd for them because I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, okay.
I wrote about the changing, how the Civil War changed dating courtship rituals, which was a lot of fun. It was when you go research, you fell down in the rabbit holes of research, and I got lost for about a week or so looking at courtship rituals and how they changed. In the antebellum years before the war, people, prospective mates needed a formal letter of introduction to parents. They needed to be approved by not only the parents, but maybe the cousins, the neighbors, acquaintances. There was a long, involved process that lasted years. And once the war broke out, all the men were gone. The husbands, brothers, fathers, all of the chaperones were gone. And women were sort of like, woo! There was a newfound freedom and also an increase for heartbreak and just the dating rules, and they were much more brazen and sexual too.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So you have a lot of fodder for other stories for Disunion, right? They're going on there. So.
Some hot Civil War action there.
So I want to know, because the way you write, and it's so fun to read, and have you ever thought about writing fiction?
Yes.
And not necessarily just historical fiction, but just a really good fiction novel.
It's funny you asked that. I'm thinking about one for my next book. You know, it's a story that's, I can't get rid of my love of fact. I love fact, I love history, so it's based on a true story, but there's not enough there to make it nonfiction.
Sure, sure.
But I can't let it go, so I'm just thinking, it's a story about a 19th century con artist, this woman in New York, and sort of what happens when her past comes creeping back to catch her. And there's just enough there to say, you know, you can lay the bones down and then you can fill them in. And it's the first time I thought about putting skin on the bones, you know, that I'm making up. So we'll see if we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So are you working on that now, or are you working on something else? Oh, good. That's a start. Yay!
1 page. So I'll get back to it, you know, when I'm back.
But any other narrative histories or any ideas you're thinking about, or you want to save those to surprise us later?
Yeah, I can't let this one go, the fiction one. So it's sort of, and I'm sort of the person that has one idea at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we can't wait for that.
Oh,
That'll be
thanks.
cool. So what do you hope readers will take away from reading Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy?
I want people who, you know, never thought they might be interested in the Civil War to say this is really a book that's not just about the Civil War, but about women's experience during this really traumatic, life-changing event during American history, and what women were capable of doing in a time when people didn't think women were capable of much. So I'm hoping to reach people who, number one, aren't necessarily readers of the Civil War or history buffs, or, you know, I'm trying to sort of broaden out and find new people, new readers.
Yeah. And maybe encourage you, maybe a little bit more look at the women's roles and sort of things where kids you don't learn that when you're in school.
Exactly.
You know, when you study the Civil War, you're not hearing these stories.
Exactly.
So maybe that'll add to that. So
I
that'd
hope
be great.
so.
Yeah. So a little quiz at the end of these
no.
interviews. You know all the answers, no pressure. Okay. So this is sort of lightning round. So whatever comes to you, quiz. Okay. What was your favorite book when you were a kid, very young?
Very young. Paris Trout. Yeah.
Yeah, great one. Okay, how about, do you remember anything in high school that has still stayed with you?
Oh, God. How to diagram sentences. Probably. Also.
Whoa, you had a great English teacher in high school, though.
Also, I could say the presidents in 10 seconds. I learned that in grade school. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to ask you to do that later. Okay. All right.
That's my stupid party trick. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, how about something in college?
Oh, Gary Smith's the sports writing with Gary Smith. Okay. It's the best by still the journalism standard I hold all journalism to.
Great. Okay, how about a book? Any book you've read your entire life that you've been an evangelist for that you could not tell enough people that they had to read?
Oh, Deliverance. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. People need to read the book.
Yeah,
and not,
exactly.
Not think about the movie.
The movie's fantastic, but the book is just the book is the most disturbing magical poem. It's a disturbing dark poem.
Yeah. Okay, how about, what would you call a guilty pleasure read? Now, it could be a magazine, could be anything.
Oh, God. If I'm in an airport, Us Weekly.
Okay, okay, good one. Okay.
All right. Get enough of that.
Right. Okay, who is your favorite historian or anyone else who's writing history today?
Oh, well, I love it. My friend Eric Larson, I have to say him. I also love Gary Christ.
Oh, yeah. Well, you wrote that other book about the Zeppelin. Yeah, the Zeppelin. I can't think of the title.
I know.
Now. It's so good. It's so good, though.
I can't either.
Okay, if you could have a dinner and invite 3 guests, you know, it could be historians, anyone from history, any writer, alive or dead, 3 guests. Who would those 3 guests be?
Edgar Allan Poe, Mary McCarthy, probably, and Oscar Wilde.
Whoa, that would be a dinner. I'd like to be there too. Okay, can I just sort of like serve you guys?
Yes,
okay. That would be great.
And hopefully they would not get along at all.
That would make it a lot more fun, right? Okay. Since you write these kind of books and you love history and looking at, what time period, if you could travel back in time just to visit, what would it be?
Oh, no question. I would like to spend a night at the Everly Club.
I knew that would be your answer.
No
I
question.
knew it. Okay. And what are you reading now, or read recently that you really enjoy?
I like Civil War. Never Home by Laird Hunt. I read that recently. I've just been stuffing myself full of Civil War books for the last 3 years.
I bet. Yeah. Okay. All right. 100%. Good score. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Karen, thanks so much. And we absolutely love this book. So come back and see us when that novel comes out.
I definitely will. I'll always come back to see you, Becky.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Incredible conversation about 4 brave, unique women who fought on either side of the Civil War. It's Karen Abbott's new book. It's called Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.